Let me tell you a story. As you know, the Troopy went into the mechanics, I think it was about the 10th of July, so around 3 weeks ago. And a whole bunch of stuff needed to be done, and I spoke about all of that in the last video. And I spoke with the mechanic earlier in the week when my car was still on the hoist, and he said that it would be ready that week. He wanted to get it out by the end of the month, which was Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, because there were still just a couple of things that needed to be done anyway. He got those sorted, gave me the final account, I transfer the funds through, and this is now Friday afternoon, and I'd sent them through on Thursday night. Now I called him at around midday to see if he had received the funds yet, and he hadn't at that stage, but he said that normally the bank comes good at about 2. And I didn't hear from him until about 3:30 when he said he had received the funds, and I said, well, I've got to try and get down there quickly. It's about a 20 to 30 minute drive. By the time I got there and to transport, it was around about just before 4:30, and they closed at 4:30. I managed to get in and then handed over the roadworthy certificate and the CTP, which is the compulsory third party insurance certificate that I had, and then the trouble started. First, because the vehicle had never been registered in Queensland, it was a New South Wales car. They had no record of it at all, even using the VIN, the vehicle identification number. Now I gave him a photo of the VIN plate so he could see that was the one on it, even though it was actually on both the CTP form and on the roadworthy. But then he'd know that we're talking about the same vehicle. He couldn't find any record of it, naturally. He couldn't find where there was a 75 series Troopcarrier, and he asked questions about how many doors it had. I mean, it's a Troopcarrier, for goodness sake. I would have thought everyone knew a Troopy, but obviously not. And then he said he had no record of the mod plate for a 2-seater, even though when the certifier came and put that plate on, he gave me a copy of the form, and I said, do I take that into transport? And he said, no, that's your copy. I send it in, and then they'll have it on record. So I can only assume that because the vehicle had never been registered in Queensland, it was just not attached to that particular VIN number. I don't know why, because that was also on the certifier's form, but it wasn't. So look, by now it's about 5 o'clock. They close at 4:30. He's obviously busting to get home, and I said, look, what I'll try and do is find a copy of the form that I was given by the certifier. I'll get a photograph of the mod plate stuck on the firewall. I'll get another, maybe clearer photograph of the VIN plate, and I'll bring all of that stuff back in on Monday and we can get it sorted. I hope by then he's actually able to find the 75 series as a listed vehicle on his system. I've actually just come out to see if I can get some filters because I was going to do an oil change and filter change, but the parts department at Toyota is closed on Saturday morning, so we weren't even successful at that. So we got it home, and I've got all of those fan belts, hoses, filters. I just want to check how many fuel filters it has, because I had to look at a couple of YouTube vids and they seem to indicate that there's 2 fuel filters, but I only got 1 from Toyota. So let's go and have a look. So there is only 1. Maybe some do have a second one. So this is the filter here, right here. This is it, and that's the primer pump there on the top. I believe it's just a matter of taking off these 2 bolts, taking off the hoses here and here, and then spinning off that filter. But there's also the switch on the bottom there that needs to come off as well. That doesn't look too bad, actually. I wonder whether that actually does need to. No, that's like a lovely shade of green. Maybe we won't do the hoses immediately. Maybe we'll just focus on those belts. I still think though that we're going to need a bit more room in order to get to the to get these belts off, and maybe that means this cowl has to come off. So let's investigate and see just what's holding that on. You'll recall the last time, don't jump out, lovey. You'll recall the last time we sat here, somebody jumped out. So let's see if we can get her to stay for a bit longer. No, we're not going, love. Oh, all right. Right. Air filter. Is this big round jobby. And look, I don't know whether it needs an air filter. I don't know what it needs. But if we do it, we'll know it won't need it for a while. This is the fuel filter. Sorry, this is the oil filter.
there. Fuel filter. Which is that one you just looked at. So there it is there, it's a screw on, but that's where that switch goes on the bottom. So it has to come off the old one, then onto the new one before this goes back in. So they're a spin on. That's the aircon compressor belt, and then those twin belts, which the fan belts, but they're identical. In the event one should snap, there's a backup. Then there are two hoses, so top and bottom radiator hoses. Look, let's call it a day at that, and when we come back next we'll be fitting some of these. Like I said, I don't think we're going to necessarily need to do the radiator flush. It actually looks pretty good with green coolant. I thought it was a bit murky, but it's not. We will definitely do the oil filter and do an oil change. I've got some oil in there. I'll just check how much I've got and how much I'm going to need to see whether I need to get any more. Oil filter and air filter, they can stay in there for now, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching.